There's a moment when your silence becomes louder than every word they ever used to control you. It's the moment the narcissist finally understands you're not waiting, you're not watching, and you're not coming back. And that realization, it doesn't just bruise their ego, it breaks it. Your silence is not weakness, it's strength. When you stop reacting, you reclaim every part of yourself that was once consumed by their chaos. Narcissists feed on reaction, it's their lifeblood. Every sigh, every tear, every attempt to explain yourself, it all becomes fuel for their ego. They twist your words, misinterpret your emotions, and turn your love into a weapon against you. And the moment you realize that silence isn't surrender, but liberation, everything begins to change. Silence is not about ignoring them out of spite. It's about choosing peace over war. It's about no longer playing a game that you never agreed to play in the first place. When you stop giving them the reactions they crave, you strip them of their script. Their world depends on attention, control, and drama, and when those are gone, the structure collapses. They start to spiral because your silence forces them to confront themselves, something they've avoided their entire lives. At first, your quiet will drive them insane. They'll do anything to provoke a response, send messages, create stories, even use other people to get under your skin. They'll tell anyone who listens that you're cold, heartless, or broken, but that's only because they can't stand that you've stepped out of their emotional reach. You've stopped being their puppet, and now they're left alone with their own emptiness. They can't stand silence because it's the sound of their control dying. In your silence, something sacred happens. You begin to hear yourself again. The noise they created, the confusion, the endless self-doubt, all of it starts to fade. You start to remember what your laughter sounds like when it's not monitored. You begin to make decisions without fear of backlash. You realize you no longer need to defend your truth to someone committed to misunderstanding it. Silence gives you space to heal, to breathe, and to rebuild from a place of strength rather than survival. Many people mistake silence for weakness, but real strength isn't loud, it's steady. It's the strength that doesn't need validation or revenge. It's the quiet confidence that says, I no longer need to prove my worth to you. And that unnerves a narcissist more than anything. Because they can't manipulate what doesn't engage. They can't dominate what doesn't participate, and they can't break someone who has stopped seeking their approval. Your silence is your boundary. It's your declaration that the cycle ends with you. It's the line between who you were when you tolerated chaos and who you are now, someone who chooses peace, clarity, and self-respect. It's not easy at first. The urge to explain yourself one last time will tempt you, but stay silent. The truth doesn't need to be shouted, it only needs to be lived, and in time, that silence will speak louder than any confrontation ever could. Because when you master the art of silence, you no longer fear losing them. You realize the only thing you ever risked losing was yourself. And now you've finally found your way home. A narcissist's biggest fear isn't losing you, it's losing power over you. To them, relationships aren't about connection or love, they're about control. They see people as extensions of themselves, tools to manage their self-image, and sources of emotional fuel. The moment you begin to detach, not just physically, but emotionally, they feel it. And that's when their entire sense of dominance starts to crumble. Detachment is different from walking away. You can leave someone and still be emotionally hooked. You can still check their updates, still crave their validation, still replay their words in your mind. But emotional detachment means you no longer react. You no longer chase their approval or defend your worth. You stop explaining yourself to someone who never truly listened. You stop playing the part they assigned you in their story. And that's the one thing they can't handle, losing access to your emotional energy. When you detach, they notice. At first, they'll try harder. They'll test your boundaries with charm, apologies, or sudden interest. They'll promise change, mirror your language, even act self-aware. But these are not signs of growth, they're tactics of survival. Narcissists don't miss you. They miss control. They miss the feeling of pulling your emotional strings. When that power disappears, they feel invisible, and invisibility to a narcissist feels like death. You'll see their confusion turn to anger. They'll accuse you of being selfish, cold, or ungrateful. But these accusations are projections of their own emptiness. What they call selfishness is really your self-respect. What they call coldness is your peace. What they call ungratefulness is your refusal to keep feeding their ego. They can't comprehend that you're no longer emotionally available for manipulation, so they lash out, trying to provoke any reaction that reminds them they still matter. But here's the truth: detachment is not cruelty, it's protection. It's you choosing to break a cycle that could have lasted a lifetime. It's realizing that their chaos doesn't deserve space in your heart anymore. You've learned to sit with your pain without returning to the person who caused it. You've learned to find comfort in your solitude rather than validation in their chaos. That is freedom, and that freedom terrifies them. The more you detach, the smaller their world becomes. They lose the ability to predict your moves, to control your emotions, to define your identity. You stop being their puppet and start becoming your own person again. And in that transformation, you reclaim something sacred: your power. The power to decide what peace looks like. The power to walk away without guilt. The power to love yourself without needing their permission. And that's the ultimate loss for them, not your presence, but your indifference. Because when they no longer have control over how you feel, they lose the only thing that made them feel powerful. And that's when their downfall begins, not when you leave, but when you finally let go. Every time you choose peace over reaction, their illusion weakens. A narcissist's entire world is built on the illusion of power, control, and superiority. They survive by convincing you that your emotions are the problem, that your truth is unstable, and that their version of reality is the only one that matters. But the moment you stop engaging in that illusion, the moment you stop fighting to be understood, their carefully constructed mask begins to crack. Your healing becomes the mirror they can't bear to look into. When you start healing, you begin to see through their manipulation. You stop mistaking chaos for passion. You stop calling abuse love. You start to realize that their affection always had conditions, and their kindness always came with strings attached. Healing teaches you discernment, the ability to see truth through deception. And that truth exposes the narcissist's biggest weakness. They have no real power over someone who has found peace within themselves. At first, your healing will confuse them. You used to react, cry, defend, explain, apologize. Now, you simply don't. You're calm, grounded, and detached. You speak less, observe more, and walk away from conflict that used to consume you. They'll sense it immediately. Because your emotional energy was their mirror, it reflected back their importance. Without it, they feel invisible. That's when the illusion starts to fade, and they begin to lose their grip. Healing doesn't mean you forget what happened. It means you finally stop allowing it to define you. You stop carrying their projections as your identity. You no longer feel the need to fix what was never your fault. You stop performing for approval and start living for authenticity. That's the most threatening thing to a narcissist, someone who no longer needs them for validation. They depend on your insecurities to keep their ego alive. When you heal, you remove their supply. You remove their ability to use your emotions as currency. But healing is not loud. It's quiet, patient, and deeply personal. It's the soft voice that says, "I deserve peace." It's choosing to walk away instead of engaging in another circular argument. It's understanding that closure doesn't come from them. It comes from within you. Each time you choose not to react, you're reclaiming power they once stole. Each time you choose silence over explanation, you're strengthening your boundaries. Each time you choose calm over chaos, you're reminding yourself that your peace is not negotiable. And while your healing liberates you, it destroys their illusion. They can no longer control the narrative because you no longer play the role they wrote for you. You're rewriting your story, one choice, one boundary, one moment of peace at a time, and as your light grows stronger, their shadow loses shape. Because in the end, your healing doesn't just expose who they are, it reveals who you've become, someone free, grounded, and untouchable. They may rush to find someone new, but no one ever replaces you. To the narcissist, relationships are not about love, they're about supply. When you walk away, their first instinct isn't to grieve, it's to replace. They can't sit in emptiness because emptiness exposes them. So they scramble to find another person to fill the void, someone who will admire, validate, and worship them the way you once did. But what they don't realize is that they're chasing a reflection, not a relationship. A narcissist doesn't love the person they're with, they love the way that person makes them feel. They love the admiration, the control, the constant reassurance that they are special. When they lose that, they go into panic mode. They need a new mirror to remind them that they still matter. That's why they move on so quickly, not because they've healed, but because they can't survive without attention. They'll plaster social media with pictures, make grand gestures of affection, and act as if they've never been happier. But beneath that display is desperation. The new person isn't their soulmate, they're a stand-in, a distraction from the gaping hole your absence created. They try to recreate the same dynamic, but it never feels the same. Because what they truly lost wasn't you as a person, it was the emotional power they once had over you. You gave them a reflection of importance, a stage to perform on. Without that, they're left with an audience that doesn't know their lines yet, and soon, the new supply starts to see through the act too. What they don't understand is that genuine connection can't be manufactured. It's something that comes from vulnerability, empathy, and trust, three things a narcissist cannot sustain. So no matter how many replacements they find, they always end up in the same cycle: idealize, devalue, discard. Over and over again, each relationship begins with fireworks and ends with emotional destruction. Because the truth is, they're not looking for love. They're looking for control, and control can never replace connection. Meanwhile, as they repeat their patterns, you begin to heal. You stop wondering what they're doing, who they're with, or whether they miss you. You start focusing on your own growth, your peace, your power. That's when you realize that their new relationship is not an upgrade. It's another illusion. It's the same story with different actors, and it will end the same way. Their attempts to replace you are proof of their emptiness, not your inadequacy. Because you can't replace authenticity. You can't duplicate the depth of someone who loved with honesty and care. You were never just a source of validation. You were a mirror that revealed who they could have been if they had chosen to grow. And now, as they chase new reflections, you're no longer part of the performance. You're free, and that freedom, that peace they'll never find, is what truly sets you apart. You were never hard to love, you were just too genuine for someone who only wanted control. Narcissists are drawn to people with warmth, empathy, and emotional depth, the very qualities they lack. They're attracted to your light because it fills the emptiness within them. But instead of honoring that light, they try to possess it, to use it as their own. From the very beginning, they study you. They mirror your kindness, your humor, your compassion. They make you feel seen in a way that feels almost magical. But what you don't realize is that they're not connecting, they're collecting. Every detail, every vulnerability, every wound you reveal becomes information they will one day use to control you. You start by loving them with everything you have, but over time, you find yourself shrinking to keep the peace. You start apologizing for things you didn't do just to avoid conflict. You start explaining your emotions to someone who has no intention of understanding them. You start mistaking manipulation for passion. You bend until you almost break, and even then, they tell you it's still not enough. And you begin to believe it, that maybe you are too much, too sensitive, too emotional. But that's the lie they need you to believe to maintain control. The truth is, your love was never the problem. The problem was that your love demanded honesty, accountability, and reciprocity, things a narcissist cannot give. They don't know how to receive love without turning it into ownership. They don't know how to feel safe without dominance. To them, vulnerability is weakness and connection is control. So instead of cherishing your authenticity, they resent it. Your empathy reminds them of what they're missing. Your stability exposes their chaos. Your strength threatens their illusion of superiority. When you finally walk away, they'll call you cold, heartless, or disloyal. But what they really mean is that you stopped giving them your power. You stopped feeding their ego. You stopped making them feel important at the expense of your own peace. And that's something they can't stand because they depend on your love to feel significant. They'll try to convince others that you were the problem because accepting that they lost someone good would shatter their fragile ego. But you will come to see the truth. You were never difficult to love. You were simply impossible to manipulate once you woke up. Your love was pure, but it was wasted on someone who saw it as a threat. They didn't want love. They wanted control, admiration, obedience. And you, being genuine, were never built to live in that kind of emotional cage. So don't let them convince you that your sensitivity is weakness or that your boundaries are cruelty. You didn't become cold, you became clear. You finally saw the difference between love that nurtures and control that destroys. And that clarity is your freedom, the kind of freedom they will spend their whole life chasing but never truly find. There's a moment when your silence becomes louder than every word they ever used to control you. It's the moment the narcissist finally understands you're not waiting, you're not watching, and you're not coming back, and that realization, it doesn't just bruise their ego, it breaks it.